Good afternoon, all of you. For the next session, our expert for this session is Dr. George V. Joseph. He is Deputy Director in Disaster Management Institute, Bhopal. Shortly, I will introduce Sir, a disaster management professional from PhD in social work from RDVV, Jabalpur. He has done his master's from University of Madras. He has over 24 years of experience in the varied fields of disaster management, human resource development, education, and community development in various states of India. His PhD work was on major accident hazardous industries and the risk perceptions of the people. Over 19 years of exclusive national level experience in disaster management planning, capacity building, research, awareness, advisory services. He has handled the major projects, including disaster management capacity building program under the Central Sector Scheme, Ministry of Agriculture, Government of India, institutionalized command system in India, community-based disaster risk reduction, a joint project of Government of Madhya Pradesh and UNICEF, disaster management capacity building program, school safety program by Government of Madhya Pradesh, contingency planning, Narmada Valley Development Authority, hospital safety program under National Health Mission, NGO capacity building on disaster management program, World Vision, CSA, Red Cross, capacity building program for financial institutions, RBI, preparation of off-site emergency management plans, etc. He has also undertaken research projects like midterm evaluation of Gujarat earthquake intervention by international NGOs, risk perception studies, and community preparedness, etc. Sir has experience of working with National University for Educational Planning and Administration. Formerly, it was NIEPA, New Delhi. Allen Bradley India Limited, Rockwell Automation. Asian Center for Organization Research and Development. Don Bosco Social Welfare Society, and many others. In various capacities in different parts of country, including in the northeast part of India. His major subject expertise includes psychosocial impact of disaster and their management, disaster management planning, disaster research and documentation, incident command system, community-based disaster management, off-site emergency management planning, tabletop exercise and mock drills, child protection in emergencies, risk perception studies and risk communication, participatory learning methods, result-based system, climate change and disaster risk reduction, project management, project monitoring and evaluation, social science research, hospital disaster management planning, integration of DRR into development process, NGO and disaster management network, and partnership development programs for effective disaster management, corporate social responsibility and disaster risk reduction, training need assessment and training design, training evaluations are also his expertise. I welcome you, sir. Hello, I welcome you, sir, for our ATAL FDP.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, ma'am, for the introduction.
Yes, sir.
We will right away start off.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Okay, good afternoon to everyone. Am I audible and visible?
Yes, sir. Sir, you are audible. Your screen is also
Okay.
visible.
Okay, thank you very much. We will be having this session on disaster risk reduction. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to share my thoughts on disaster risk reduction. So, I think in the morning you had already one section on seismic risk by Dr. Dilip. So I'm sure you are aware of various issues regarding disaster risk reduction. And my topic is, as I said, it is on disaster risk reduction. Many of you must have also experienced various disasters. And there are various type of disasters and like floods or even tsunami, earthquake, COVID, a number of disasters are there. And due to the increasing vulnerabilities of the people and also the build-up environment, there is an increase in the occurrence of hazardous events. So, in this context, it is very, very important to understand the concept of disaster risk reduction. And I will talk about these issues. Um, so, as you are aware, we need to be prepared for various type of disasters. Disaster, the one of the main characteristics of disaster is they do not wait for our preparedness. So, it may happen anytime, and all of us are affected, whether we are poor or rich, or in a city or in a rural area, all are affected. So it is very, very important that we prepare ourselves to face disasters. When we speak about disasters, it is also important to understand the concept of disasters. Disasters are events. Basically, they can be man-made or sudden or progressive or even natural. And these strike the community with such severity that result in a lot of devastation, loss of life, as well as property, and also livelihood, and results in human sufferings. So the main crux of the issue is that it normally goes beyond the coping capability of the local community to manage. As a result of that, the community needs to mobilize resources from outside. So there is a difference between an accident and a disaster. So accidents are normally managed within the community with their own resources. But when it goes beyond the capability of the community to manage, it becomes a disaster. So all this normally disrupts the functioning of the society. It disrupts the functioning of the society, and the administration needs to take exceptional measures to manage this. So their routine procedures, it is not possible to be managed. And as I already mentioned, affected community require external aid, and it involves multiple agencies and multiple sectors for the management of disasters, as well as it retards the socio-economic development of the particular region. So this is one of the definitions of disasters. When we speak about disasters, there are certain basic components. Like one is the hazards. Hazards are basically that pose a threat to the people or structure or the economic asset which may cause a disaster. per se they are not disaster, but these hazards have potential to cause a disaster. And this could be man-made hazards or natural hazards. So basically, we need to, if you look at any dam, there is a lot of water in that. So the presence of huge amount of water is a hazard for the low-lying people. Or if you take, for example, there are certain industries which are having hazardous chemicals, their process or transportation. So they could be hazards for the people who are living around. So when we speak about disasters or disastrous reduction, it is important to understand the hazards of various localities. And in order to understand this hazard, there are also certain methods to assess these hazards. One of the method would be the timeline analysis, wherein we are able to identify the hazards of a particular area by their historical occurrence. So, suppose we want to identify the hazards which are there in Bhopal. So, one of the ways of identifying is to identify the hazardous events which have occurred maybe in the last 50 to 100 years. So, that will give an indication as to what would be the hazardous scenario in future. So historical analysis of the hazardous events and what type of impact it has caused, how it was managed, what were the weaknesses in the system, which are the areas which those were affected. All this can be analyzed through this timeline method. Another way of identifying the hazard is through seasonality diagram. So we need to look at what seasons various hazardous events occur in our particular area. So we can have a month-wise analysis. The month of January, what type of hazardous events may occur in our particular area, or February, March, like that we can have analysis depending on the season. So that is the second method of analyzing the assessing the hazard. And the third method could be the hazard mapping. We take the particular map of a particular area, and in the map we can identify the type of hazards which may occur in different places. So these are simple methods of assessing and identifying the hazards. So I spoke about the timeline analysis, the seasonality diagram, and the third, the hazard mapping. So hazards per se are not disasters, they have potential to cause a disaster. Second issue when we speak about disaster management is the vulnerability. People are not equally vulnerable to various hazardous events. Some people and some structures are more vulnerable due to various reasons. It could be due to the proximity to the hazardous area or hazardous event. It could be due to the social condition of the people and the property in that area, or it could be due to the physical condition, location, or due to the organizational structure of that particular settlement. If there are good leaderships, for example, the community may be able to manage the disasters in a much better way. So vulnerabilities are to the extent which a community or structure or service or geographical area is likely to be damaged or disrupted by the impact of a particular hazard on account of their nature, construction, and proximity to hazardous terrain or a disaster-prone area. So the villages and settlements which are close to maybe the riverbed or river, they are more prone to, they are more affected by hazardous events. Or if you are living in a landslide prone area, a hilly area with slopes, that area may be more vulnerable to landslides. Or if you are differently abled person, you may be more vulnerable. So the second component of any understanding of disaster is the vulnerability, property to from the location, or because of the proximity to hazardous terrain. It could be due to the lack of knowledge, understanding, or lack of leadership, lack of organizational effective structure, and things like that. So there could be physical vulnerability as well as social vulnerability. So both are important. So this needs to be understood. Physical vulnerability depends on the physical location of the people and elements at risk. Building sites, infrastructure, which are close to hazardous area, vary according to construction techniques. Suppose the material which are used for construction, if they are substandard or proper designs and no things are not done, then the building may be more vulnerable. Socioeconomic vulnerability depends on the human activities, so like the education, economic factors, or things like that. If people, for example, if people who have got a secondary income, they may not be affected by disasters so much as the people who may not be having this type of secondary source of income. Or normally the research also says that people who are knowledgeable, aware of things, they may be less vulnerable to hazardous events and disaster events. So the second component, as far as the disaster risk reduction is concerned, that is the vulnerability. And the third component, when we speak about hazardous disaster risk reduction, is the capacity. Capacities are the resources people have both in terms of manpower and material resources. So, in order to effectively do the disaster risk reduction, we need to have resources, either in terms of manpower or material. So, this is not only for disaster response, but also for preparedness and disaster mitigation, or even for disaster prevention. So we need to look at what type of capacities we have to do the disaster risk reduction. So capacity analysis can also be done through risk, through resource inventory and resource mapping. So in a particular area, what type of capacities we have, we can do the resource inventory depending on the various categories of resources available. It may be medical resources, it may be search and rescue resources, or it may be even temporary shelter. It can be resources which are available for preparedness and things like that. So we need to look at resources, resource inventory, and resource mapping. We can also identify using a map as to what type of resources we have for managing disasters. So that's the third component. So there is a definition. Disaster risk is equivalent to hazard into vulnerability by capacity. So if that is the case, in order to reduce the disaster risk, what all things we need to do? We have to increase the capacities of various areas and systems. We need to reduce the vulnerabilities of the people. We also need to control the hazards. So that is a way to reduce the disaster risk. So it is not an exercise which we need to do after the disaster take place. It needs to be done throughout, just like developmental planning or developmental activities. Disaster risk reduction is an ongoing activity, so it needs to be done throughout. Capacity building, training, reducing the vulnerabilities of the people, controlling the hazards, all this. There is a concept of risk. What is it? Risk is a measure of expected losses due to a hazardous event of a particular magnitude occurring in a given area over a period of time. So, risk is the expected loss due to a hazardous event taking place in a particular area. So there are various factors losses each would cause. The level of risk depends on the nature of hazard, vulnerabilities of the elements at risk, and the value. For example, if a earthquake of the magnitude of 6 takes place in Mumbai and in Bhopal, the risk will vary because the vulnerabilities and at risk, the economic value of the properties and the density of population all are different. So the risk will vary. Three elements to it. One is the hazard. The word is exposed to this particular hazardous event. So risk depends on all these three parameters. So this is called risk triangle. Risk is high when vulnerable communities living in hazard-prone areas get exposed to hazard occurrence. Larger the number of people exposed, the higher the risk. The vulnerability of the people, if the people and property are more, then the risk will be more. The higher the intensity of the hazard occurring, then there could be more risk. So these are the three parameters. When we speak about disaster impact, there are various type of impacts. Disasters bring in physical impact, injuries, death, physical disability, burns, epidemic, weakness, uneasiness, physical illness, sanitation issues, miscarriage. So all these problems are caused by disasters. So that is the physical part of it. Then there is another component, that is we are also affected economically by disasters. So as all of you are aware, there is a loss of life, unemployment. Even the COVID is a very live example wherein there was huge economic loss due to lack of businesses not functioning and various issues as you have already noticed. There is unemployment issue, loss of livelihood, loss of property, loss of household articles, especially floods and earthquakes and fires, loss of crops, loss of public infrastructure. All these are resulting in economic impact. Then there is another issue where disasters cause social impact. See, normally there are various cycles of support we have in normal times. Suppose during a normal time, if there is a problem in anyone's family, the family members try to come and help. So that is the first cyclo support we have. But during a disaster, everyone in the family is affected. As a result, normal conditions, the second line of support or second cyclo support we have is that of the extended family. Again, if there are issues and problems in a family, the extended family is there to help, like the close relations and things like that. But during a disaster, this second cycle of support is also not available due to the various disasters. The people who are close relations, they themselves are affected, they will not be in a position to come and help. We can see the example of COVID also. During COVID, even everyone was affected, family was affected, extended family was affected. So they were not in a position to help. The third cycle of support we normally have is that of the community support. Community provides support. If there is a normal death in a family, the people who are in and around, they come and support the entire process of the deprivation due to death. They come and support in terms of helping out and consoling. But during a disaster, even the community is also affected. They have their own problems and issues because of disasters. So as such, the third cyclo support is also affected. And the fourth cyclo support we normally have is that of the institutional support. So we have the various institutions like the collectorate or the hospitals, the local self-governments, police stations, hospitals, and things like that. But during a disaster, what happens? These institutions themselves are affected. So as such, they would not be in a position to help the people or provide those support. So all the cyclo support is affected during disaster. Another issue is change of role. Suppose in the family the breadwinner dies because of disaster. So maybe another person has to take the role of the breadwinner. So change of role takes place. Disruption in social fabrics, social systems are disturbed. Isolation. Due to disaster, people are not able to interact. They are socially isolated. Change in marital status. That is another issue, like widower, widow. So all this. Abuse and domestic violence. Many times, disasters are also opportunities for antisocial elements to activate themselves. So abuses and domestic violence also becomes the order of the day. So that is another issue. Then orphans. So disasters brings death. So as such, orphans, single parents, family disorganization. Suppose family members have died because of disaster. So it brings in disorganization. And another key issue, social issue, is that of migration. People, especially in droughts and other major disasters, famine and things like that, they migrate to cities. And when they migrate to cities, they leave their dear ones, and there could be problems at household level. And when these people move to cities, they have issues with the housing, sanitation, they live in crowded places. So migration and resulting issues, lifestyle changes also is another this thing. Some people take into alcoholism or drugs and things like that due to the social issues, then breakdown in social systems. So all this bring in social impact. And the fourth component wherein people are affected are basically they are psychologically affected. Though this disasters bring distress, people are distressed. I mean, you can see so many people who have lost their dear ones, so they are in distress because of this loss and incidents of disaster. They are not able to concentrate. They get into, they can't sleep. Whenever they try to sleep, they get flashback. They are not able to, they are not able to face those situations. So they avoid situations and places and areas connected with those type of events. Suppose a person has been affected by a train disaster. So you may not like to travel by train. Hatred and revenge. So that is another thing, especially in communal rights and things like that. People are not able to, they have this feeling of hatred. They want to take revenge against certain communities and groups. So that feeling is also there. Many people, they are not able to accept the reality, especially of the loss of their dear ones. So they visually say that their children are still alive, or their husband is alive, wife is alive, when the death has already taken place. They are in a mood of denial. So they are not able to accept the realities. Then it disasters also brings in the issue of dependence, insecurity. Always they are not able to depend on others, and insecurity feeling. So आगे क्या होगा, what would be future? So that worries are there. Grieve and withdrawn, isolation. So people, they grieve, they are not able to mix with people, they isolate themselves because of the grief. So that is another issue. And many people feel that disasters have happened because of their carelessness or lack of taking care of the issues on a timely manner. So that guilt feeling is there. Then some people, of course, they feel happy they were able to help people or they were not affected. So that type of feeling is also there. Then some people are hyper vigilant. That vigilance is there, especially in natural disasters, especially in like if you have lightning and things like that. So they are more vigilant. And lack of trust, they are not able to trust people, especially these human related man-made disasters that brings in a lot of trust issues. Then another psychological impact is helplessness. So everything has been lost, and how they will manage, there is nobody to help. That type of feeling, and hopelessness, helplessness and hopelessness, that type of feeling is also there. So all these are psychological impact of disasters. And the psychological impact of disasters, if they are not attended to, they can be very long lasting, and sometimes it also takes away the lives of the people. So it is very, very important we address all this. So as I have said, mentioned, there are four impacts. So whenever we work with disaster affected people, we impact and economic impact, we need to address social impact as well as psychological impact, and all the impacts. So all interventions needs to address all these issues. But if we are only addressing physical and say psychological impact, but you are leaving out the economic and social impact, then it is not possible for the people who are affected to recover from the impact of disaster. So one needs to understand that we need to have a comprehensive intervention to people who are affected by disasters. Then coming to, there is an interaction between the hazardous events and vulnerable conditions. Whenever, say, earthquake per se are not disasters unless they are impacting the vulnerable population and property. If earthquake happens in a ocean which doesn't create tsunami, so it may not become a disaster. Or if uh, flood happening in a desert where there are no habitation, it need not create a flood disaster. So hazardous events per se are not disasters. When these hazardous events interact with vulnerable people and property, and the affected system is not able to manage with that, with their own resources, then it becomes a disaster. So there is an interaction between hazards and vulnerable conditions. And if we look deep into these vulnerable conditions and vulnerability, there are certain underlying causes like poverty, limited access to resources and power structure, certain ideologies. So all these are root causes of vulnerability. Then there are certain dynamic pressures like lack of local institutions, education, training, appropriate skills, local investment, local market, freedom of press. So all this. So they also increase the vulnerabilities of the people, and population expansion and urbanization, environmental degradation. All this bring more pressures to the vulnerabilities of the people, or they increase the vulnerabilities of the people. As well as there are certain unsafe conditions like dangerous location, dangerous buildings, and infrastructure. So all these are also creating vulnerabilities. So if you want to work in disaster risk reduction, what we need to do, we need to address the underlying causes, the dynamic pressures and unsafe conditions. As well as, of course, we should try to control the hazardous events. So disaster risk reduction effectively refers to vulnerability reduction, hazard control, and capacity enhancement. So there is an interaction between hazardous events and the vulnerability. So if you are working for poverty reduction, institutional building, education, training, and investment and all, it may indirectly be reducing the vulnerabilities of the people, and as such you can do disaster risk reduction. So this needs to be understood. Now coming to disaster management. Disaster management means a continuous and integrated process of planning, organizing, coordinating, and implementing measures which are necessary for prevention of disasters, mitigation of disasters, preparedness, prompt response, and rehabilitation. So there are various phases of disaster management. So we are going to address these issues. So there is something known as the disaster management cycle, which speaks about the various components of disaster management. Say, for example, whenever a disaster happens, what the system does. it actually tried to address or respond to that scenario. There is a fire or a COVID case, or there is a flood or earthquake and things like that. We try to respond to that. Response to that situation by way of maybe communicating, early warning, or search and rescue, or evacuating the people, or providing first aid to the people, or transporting the people who are affected and placing them in a temporary shelter. And in the shelter, they are provided with food, water, sanitation, safety, security, counseling, and things like that. So all these are actually response activities. These are response activities we do immediately after a disaster. So there we need to have systems in place, and this response is very, very important. It needs to be done in a timely manner because life is at stake. So our systems should be always in readiness. Whatever search and rescue system or ambulance system or communication systems, all this should be in readiness at all time, because disaster by its nature, it can happen anytime, anywhere in the world. And one disaster may be followed by another disaster also. So this is the aspect of response. Then there is another aspect that is called disaster rehabilitation. So there are two type of rehabilitation. One is the short-term rehabilitation of the people and systems, and another is the long-term rehabilitation. When we speak about the short-term rehabilitation, basically, whenever a disaster takes place, we need to restore the critical infrastructure and lifeline services on a priority basis. This may include like the restoration of electricity, or transportation routes, or the communication, or the medical facilities, or even the education system. All these are very, very critical, without which we may not be able to further go ahead for reconstruction, rehabilitation, and resettlement. So, short term rehabilitation is basically addressed to restore the lifeline services. And normally it has to be done at the earliest, but in any case, within 3 months maximum. And there is the concept of long term rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is basically the activities which we do after a disaster, so that the affected systems and people are brought back to normalcy. Before the disaster, the scenario how it was, better than that we need to rebuild. So long-term rehabilitation includes reconstruction of the entire affected area, housing, resettlement of the people, and medical and psychological rehabilitation of the people. So these are the post-disaster management activities: response, rehabilitation, reconstruction, redevelopment, resettlement. All these are the post-disaster management activities. Now, there are also certain pre-disaster management activities. So we need to look at the pre-disaster management activity. One of the important component is that of prevention of disasters. We need to prevent disasters which can be like stopped from occurring. So like for example, certain urban disasters, urban floods can be stopped or prevented. Urban fires, accidents can be prevented. Even certain epidemics, etc., can be prevented through vaccination and other methods. So prevention of disasters is another component. Secondly, if we are not able to prevent these disasters, we can reduce the impact of disasters through structural and non-structural mitigation measures. So mitigations are activities which we take up before a disaster so that the impact of disasters can be minimized. For example, if you are living in a drought prone area, we can take up certain structural mitigation measures like recharging, harvesting of rainwater, or creating check dams, or we can also level the places and try to conserve the water and things like that. So if you are able to do these structural mitigation measures, there could be droughts, but due to these structural mitigation measures which you have taken up, the impact of that drought could be minimized. So these are structural mitigation. Or if you are living, say for example, in an earthquake prone area, one need to build earthquake resistant constructions. There are certain codal provisions are there. We need to follow those building codes and build the houses and structures so that whenever disaster happens, these structures are able to resist the movement, or they are not affected. So as such, there may
Sorry, sir, to
be
interrupt.
some
Sir, your
cracks
slides
and
are
all,
not
but
visible, sir.
अभी दिखाई नहीं दे रहे?
Sir, slides are not visible, sir. They are not
Okay.
in the presentation mode right now.
Oh, abhi only.
No, it's been some time, sir, like maybe 5 minutes or 7 minutes.
Sir, but it is
Okay.
visible in my laptop, sir.
Okay. Is it okay now? दिखाई दे रहे हैं? Hello?
Yes,
Yes,
sir,
sir, I
please
can see it.
do full
Okay,
screen.
okay. Full screen करना है?
Yes, yes, sir.
Can you see now, please?
Yes, sir.
Is it okay? So I was speaking about the mitigation measures, and there could be both structural and non-structural mitigation measures. Structural measures are basically we take up measures like using structures like earthquake resistant construction, check dams, leveling, or flood walls, levees, and things like that, by which we are able to structurally mitigate the effect of disasters. Non-structural mitigation measures are basically developing knowledge, right attitude, and right safety culture among the people. We say no, knowledge is power. So if we are able to inculcate right type of behavioral pattern among the likely to be affected people, they will be in a position to behave in a right manner, and as a result of that, the impact of that disaster can be reduced. For example, in the case of Bhopal gas tragedy, as you all may be knowing, the people who knew about the properties of the gas leaked, many of them, they have closed the doors and windows, and then they took out the blankets and then they slept. And many of these people were not affected. But people who didn't know about the properties of the gas leaked, they have run away and they inhaled more gas. And as a result of that, many of these people have perished. So if we are able to inculcate the right type of attitude, culture, and knowledge and behavioral pattern among the people, then it is able to bring in it is able to reduce the impact of disaster in terms of death or the casualties. So these are structural and non-structural mitigation measures. By taking up these structural and non-structural mitigation measures on a timely manner, we are able to reduce the disaster risk. Then if we are not able to prevent and mitigate disasters, and the third option would be to be ready to face any type of disasters. They are called preparedness measures. So, as far as the disasters are concerned, it is very, very important that we prepare ourselves and be in readiness at all time. So, what are the major measures for preparedness? One of the important component is to prepare a disaster management plan. And these disaster management plans should be prepared at various levels. It can be at individual level, personal level, to face any type of eventualities. We can have an individual level plan or a family level disaster management plan or a community level disaster management plan or a level or a state level or national level disaster management plans. So these plans will keep all the systems for effective response in readiness at all time. As a result of that, whenever a disaster occurs, the response team will be able to move very, very fast and effectively with effective tools and equipments, and would be able to respond in a very, very timely manner. And as a result of that, maximum casualties could be reduced. So that is preparedness. So preparedness also includes conduct of mock drills. Trying to conduct mock drills before a disaster takes place. Just create scenarios and mock exercises and see how your plan will work during a disaster before, in fact, a disaster takes place. So that type of rehearsals and practice will make the systems refined and always in readiness. So that system will be further developed. So it includes preparation of the plans, mock drills, training of people, training the various agencies who are to respond during a disaster. So this training could be in coordination, maybe in search and rescue, first aid, emergency communication, erection of temporary shelters, provision of food. So any of this. So that type of preparedness and training is very much required. So if you are able to be, if you are staying in a prepared community, there are chances that the impact of disasters will be reduced because of the effective response on a timely manner. So that's about preparedness. And nowadays, disaster management is not considered as a separate subject. It is part of our development process, wherein we have to incorporate in our development process disaster management components. For example, if you are building a university, university should be made disaster resistant and inbuilt systems should be there to respond to disasters, and like firefighting system or emergency alarm system or emergency response systems should be incorporated in that. If you are building a bridge, for example, it should be made disaster resistant. ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए whenever flood happens it should collapse. So your buildings and hospitals and schools and bridges and houses, all this should be made disaster resistant. So that is the important So it is very, very critical to take care of the public safety, law and order issues, abuse issues needs to be addressed, child protection issues needs to be addressed. So these are important. Then shelter and housing. When we speak about shelter and housing, we have to see there are cross sections of the people. There may be women, children, differently abled, and old people. So their needs in the shelter, food, water, sanitation, safety, all these things needs to be addressed in a very focused manner. Everyone, we can't provide everyone just puri and sabji and that's it. So there may be a different requirement of the people. So there will be these are actually representation of the community. So we need to see how we can address this. Then media management. So that is another critical issue we need to look at. Whenever a disaster takes place, the people need to be reassured and they need to be told as to what type of arrangements, what type of mechanisms are in place. So, especially in a democratic situation like ours, media management is very critical. So, there should be people trained in that so that they are able to communicate in a proper manner and timely manner. Then, power and electricity, all these are also important. These are all emergency support functions. So, we need to have systems in place for this. Now, this development and disaster management, they cannot be going in different direction. We need to move them in same direction. So, like for example, these two, we need to go in the same direction, otherwise there will be problem. So, we need to look at poverty reduction issues. As I mentioned, there is an interaction between hazardous events and vulnerable population. So if we need to look at how we can reduce the vulnerabilities of the people, so by way of poverty reduction, so that the people will not be so much affected by the impact of disasters. Another important issue is better services. We need to provide people with medical services which are better in nature, or emergency response services, fire services. All this needs to be provided in a better manner. Multiple livelihood options. If everyone is depending on a particular set of livelihood, then in case a disaster takes place in a particular area, everyone will be affected. So if there are people engaged in various activities, it is less likely that all of them would be affected. So that is something which we need to look at, especially in our agriculture sector. Then another key component is that of looking beyond the physical vulnerabilities of the people. When we spoke about the vulnerabilities of the people, we spoke about social vulnerability, organizational vulnerability, physical vulnerability, and things like that. So we need to also look at the other aspects of vulnerabilities like social vulnerability, educational vulnerability. So that also is equally important. Then we can't reduce the impact of disasters, or disaster risk reduction cannot be done by just no one manager managing from top. So we need to involve the community, and people's participation and their capabilities needs to be recognized and effectively used. So people's involvement is equally important, and community participation. So you must have seen during COVID also, in the initial stages, there were issues in community participation and involvement of the people. So when we it was a huge task. So there was involvement of the community, and then we were able to manage in a better way. So community participation, involvement is equally important. Then another important component you must have noticed, whenever a disaster takes place, it is the coordination that is that is normally lacks, because there are multiple agencies involved, multiple sectors involved, and multiple locations are affected. So coordination among the various agencies, organizations and sectors are equally important. So there should be coordinating agencies. There are like national level, we have the National Authority on Disaster Management. State level, we have the State Disaster Management Authority, and district level, we have District Disaster Management Authority, and the local, we have local authorities, Stani authorities. So that coordination is established. So that is equally important. So I think all these issues are important for managing disasters effectively. Now, coming to the various type of disasters, we have disasters which are they are in 5 groups. We have water and climate related disasters, geological related disasters, chemical disasters, accident related disasters, and biological related disasters. So we try to understand each of this. So water and climate related disasters, we have the flood and drainage management. So if there are no proper drains, especially in the urban sectors, disasters are taking lack of drainage management. Flood situations are there, cyclones are there, then tornadoes, hurricanes are there, hailstorms, then cloud burst, then cold wave, heat wave, sea erosion, then droughts. All these are falling under this water and climate related disasters. So we need to, when we do the hazard analysis, we need to understand events taking place in our area. So what is the frequency, what season they are occurring. So all these details we need to understand. Now, coming to the next group of disasters, we have the geological related disasters. We have earthquakes and tsunamis. I think we had a discussion in the morning about seismic risk, landslides and mud flows, dam burst, and mine fires. So these are another group of disasters. So we need to look at those. Okay. Any issues so far? Hello.
Okay, sir, audible.
Okay. Then we have this chemical disasters. chemical and industrial disasters. So, like we have the Bhopal gas tragedy, and so there are certain places which are prone to chemical and industrial disasters. So we need to look at which are those places, which are those areas where we have these chemical industrial disasters likelihood of those disasters, and we need to prepare for that. In chemical industrial disasters, we may have fire explosion or gas leak, and things like that. So we need to be prepared for that.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir. I have one doubt.
वहाँ ये आपसे मिला है मतलब चलेगा ये कल
Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir, you
Hello.
are audible. Sir, you are audible. Any questions from the participants, please type in the chat box.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Hello. There's some problem with the connectivity. I'm not able to access.
Sir, we can hear you. Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay. So is it visible now?
So please share your screen.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Is it okay? Hello? Oh,
So your screen is not visible presentation.
okay. So anyway, I think there are some problems. We will anyway continue.
Yes, sir.
So we spoke about the various type of disasters, and then we spoke about industrial nuclear disasters, and then we said about accident related disasters. So these could be various type of disasters like various fires, festival related disasters, and then road accidents or rail accidents, boat capsizing. All these things also could happen. Then the fifth category is biological related disasters, wherein we have the pest attack, cattle epidemic, food poisoning. We have also all these swine flu, bird flu, anthrax, and all that. So these are also possible type of disasters. As far as the country is concerned, we are prone to various type of disasters because of our geographical and location. And we have one place we may have flood, at the same time another place we may have droughts. So this type of situations are existing, and the basic thing is we need to be prepared. And because of disasters we can have various type of direct, indirect, and secondary losses. And the important thing is that this disaster risk reduction we need to initiate from our side. Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinking of changing oneself. The question is, disaster risk reduction has to start from our personal life, and it is a huge work. So one person may not be able to do this one. So what we need to do is we need to network with various agencies. Whatever resources are available, that needs to be networked and effectively managed. And so the approach to disaster risk reduction is that of all of society approach. Everyone needs to be involved. So, and we need to build partnership with various agencies. And again, it is multi-hazard and multi-agency approach. So we are not only looking at one particular type of hazard. When we look at disaster risk reduction, we have to look at from a multi-hazard, multi-agency approach. So various agencies need to be involved, and we need to comprehensively look at from a geographical point of view. And as far as the disaster risk reduction framework is concerned, international level we have the Sendai framework of action, which is from 2015 to 2030. There is an international agreement among various countries, and it has got certain priorities, and there's a framework that is called Sendai framework of action. Then we have the Disaster Management Act of 2005, which speaks about various systems and subsystems which are there to manage disasters. And there is a disaster management policy of the government of 2009, which again speaks about involving everyone for management of disasters, and developing a culture of safety and culture of preparedness and culture of quick response and culture of strategic action for disaster risk reduction. So because of this involvement of Disaster Management Act, enactment of the act, there has been a shift from a disaster response centric approach to disaster proactive approach of disaster prevention, mitigation, and preparedness type of an approach. And when we speak about the National Act, Disaster Management Act, there is a national authority at the central level, which is headed by the Prime Minister. At the state level, we have the State Disaster Management Authority headed by the CM. And district level, we have the district authority headed by the district magistrates. Then at the local level, we have local authorities. So this type of agencies are established. And at the national level, we have also National Disaster Response Force. There are 12 battalions which are exclusively working for disaster response. And a certain amount of various funds are also created, like calamity relief fund, then disaster mitigation fund, and capacity building fund. This type of funds have also been created for disaster management in an effective manner. Then these various authorities have powers and functions. If you look at the state level, the state authority is supposed to make a disaster management plan. Similarly, district authority is supposed to make a district disaster management plan, and they have been given a lot of authorities, responsibilities, and powers, and also financial and administrative powers. The district authority, for example, they can requisition any type of resources which are existing in the district, whether it is private to public or NGO or third party. They can requisition for disaster management. They are supposed to also provide technical advice to local authorities, and they are also supposed to keep stock files of rescue and relief materials. And at the same time, all the departments of the district, whether it is revenue, police, or health, every department is supposed to have a disaster management plan. Then at the district level, we have something known as district disaster management plan. And this district disaster management plan is supposed to identify various vulnerable areas to various type of hazardous events. And they are supposed to be having capacity building plan, response plan, and training and training and conduct of mock drills. This type of things are elaborated in the district plan. And this district authority may order any officer or local authority department to take action for prevention, mitigation, and effective response for disasters. They can give orders for release of resources, control vehicular movements, control entry of VIPs, remove debris, provide shelter, establish emergency control rooms. Or they are also supposed to be doing the disposal of dead and unclaimed bodies. They can procure exclusively or preferential use of amenities for any disaster management authority. They may also provide construction of temporary bridges, demolished old structures, and also they have to ensure these NGOs or any agency which are working, they are working in a non-discriminative manner and in an equitable manner. So that is also there. And then they are supposed to direct all the agencies to take necessary measures. Apart from this, there is a local authority like in the Gram Panchayat or Nagarpalika, Nagar Nigam commissionerate level. They are supposed to be having the local authorities, and these local authorities are supposed to ensure all the construction works are in conformity to standards and specifications to building codes. And they are also supposed to carry out relief and rehabilitation and may take up all the other measures. So this type of things are there. And as far as the approach is concerned, it is based on community based approach. So last mile integration involving the local community, and learning from the past experiences, cooperation with the international agencies, multi-sectoral synergy development, all these issues are touched upon. And there are also important agencies like armed forces, central paramilitary forces, state police, civil defense, NYK, NSS, international agencies. All these are effectively involved for disaster risk reduction. There are also exclusive financial arrangements under the there is a mitigation fund, techno financial regime for catastrophic risk financing, risk insurance, then calamity relief fund, capacity development fund. All these funds are also provided. Then it also speaks about critical infrastructure, environmental sustainable development, climate change adaptation. Then preparedness, it speaks about state level plans, district level plans, community level plans. Then it also speaks about forecasting early warning systems, effective early warning systems to reach the last person. Then strengthening of emergency operation centers, medical preparedness and mass casualty management. Then training and the conduct of simulation exercises. All these issues are spoken about. And even for corporates, they can use the corporate social responsibility funds for disaster risk reduction. So I think I've spoken in detail about various issues, but before I bind up, I will also maybe take 5 minutes to speak about the Prime Minister's 10-point agenda. The Prime Minister of India has come out with a 10-point agenda program for disaster risk reduction. So it is first of this agenda speaks about all developmental sectors must imbibe the principles of disaster risk management. So Prime Minister का कहना ये है, all the development sector we should include disaster management and risk management principles. This will ensure that all development projects, airports, roads, canals, hospitals, schools, bridges are built to appropriate standards and contribute to resilience of communities they seek to serve. So many times we see that when these airports are required, they are flooded. So this type of development should not take place. That is what he has emphasized. Then work towards risk coverage. So it speaks about insurance coverage for especially the poor households. Sureksha Bima Yojana or Fasal Bima Yojana, all this needs to be extended, especially for the disaster prone areas. So that is something. Secondly, he speaks about work towards risk coverage. Then encourage greater involvement of women. So women are equal partners in the development process or in the disaster management sphere also. They need to be equally involved. As of now, we find that many of the, there are discrepancies. Women are not appropriately involved, whether it is preparedness, response, or rehabilitation issues. Then fourth thing, invest in risk mapping. So the Prime Minister has emphasized that we should identify the risk-prone areas. Mapping should be appropriately done. Leverage technology to enhance the efficacy of our disaster risk management. So again, the various type of technology, whether it is the mobile technology or internet technology, all this needs to be utilized. Then it also speaks about develop a network of universities to work on disaster related issues. So collaboration with the various education institutions and network of universities for disaster reduction. Then it speaks about utilize opportunities provided by social media and mobile technologies for especially for effective disaster response, warning system, awareness, and communication. Then build on local capabilities and capacities and initiatives. So whatever local initiatives have been taken by the people needs to be recognized, and we need to further replicate this. So that is what he spoke about. And then it also speaks about ensuring that the opportunity to learn from disasters are not wasted. Whenever a disaster happens, the proper case studies and proper documentation needs to be done, so that next time this type of similar issues are occurred, we will be able to manage in a better manner. Then it also speaks about international cooperation. So I think I have covered quite a lot of issues. If you have any questions, we will open the floor for the questions. Hello.
Yes, participants, please, if you have any questions, please ask, or you can type in the chat box also.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Sir,
Sorry, there was disturbance because of connectivity issues.
No, sir, no issue.
Okay.
Sir, what are the various application for the research scholar in engineering?
Applications basically, see, when you are you depending on the which field you are from,
Civil engineer.
which engineer, you are civil engineer.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes,
So
sir. Civil
civil
engineering.
engineering, so there are issues like disaster resistant construction technologies and building codes and application of that in your civil engineering. So there are various building codes which have been revised in the year 2016. Those codes needs to be studied, and how these codes can be effectively used for design and the application of that is very, very important depending on the seismic map of India. So I think, I'm sure, in the morning Dilip must have talked to you about the various zones, and for each zone there are building codes which are appropriate. So those building codes needs to be used while you design the buildings. So that is the critical thing for civil engineers. Hello.
Okay, sir. Okay. Okay.
Yes, sir. Sir has discussed the various seismic zones of India, as
Yeah,
well
yeah,
as the various seismic faults in the Madhya Pradesh region. Yes. Any
yeah,
questions
yeah, yeah.
from the
So
participants?
accordingly, there are
Any queries? So one question is from my side, sir. Is disaster management, your institute is working on COVID, this COVID pandemic? How you are dealing with
see,
this?
we are doing some documentation aspects. Apart from that, we are supporting the government wherever required. For no, we are also in the home department. So wherever it is required, the support is provided to the government. But otherwise, it is a medical, this thing, the nodal agency is the medical department. But as far as the management issues are concerned, they consult us sometimes. So we provide our support,
Oh, yes.
especially the management issues.
Sir, but during some disaster, then you deal with some NGOs, or who are the volunteers in that case?
So I just wanted to tell you, Disaster Management Institute is an autonomous organization. Basic focus is on training and advisory services, as well as providing awareness and education. But the management per se of the disasters is done by the government department concerned. So there is a home department, which is the nodal agency. There is a state disaster management authority, which is empowered as per the Disaster Management Act to do the needful in collaboration with the various departments. But if they need technical advice in terms of knowledge issues, education issues, documentation issues, these things are provided by the institute. Because as per the act, the government per se, there are departments and nodal authorities. So those are empowered, and they are legally empowered to take up measures, and it is their responsibility also.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Any queries?
Okay.
Any more queries? Okay, thank you very much, sir. Thank you for sparing your valuable
Thank you.
time and expertise for our participants in the ATAL FDP program. Hope your guidance in future also, sir. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, I'll be available. Sorry for the inconvenience because of the technical issue, but I hope you, all the participants, would have got some information and idea, and we are there to further support you in any way possible.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. All the participants are aware of the internet connectivity and they are facing it.
Yeah.
So no issue, sir. No issue.
Okay.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank
So
you.
thank you, participants, for the today's session. Tomorrow we will join the session at 10 a.m. Kindly join the session and please mark your attendance on the Google form, which is shared in the WhatsApp group as well as in the chat box. Please mark your attendance. Thank you very much, participants. We are leaving this meeting. Thank you.